What's going on, everyone? Today we're taking a look at coolers, particularly this Oyster cooler right here. But before we dive into this cooler, I want to first give you a little background of some of the other coolers I've been using since building out my setup. So it all began actually with this cooler behind me here, the Yeti Tundra 35. And this is a really solid cooler. Yeti is known for building, top-notch, high quality, durable gear, and it's exactly that. I mean, this thing claims to be bear proof, it holds the ice really well, but there's a couple things to keep in mind about that. So for this one to properly hold the ice, you have to fill it 2/3 full of ice, which is a lot of ice. And not only that, but you have to also pre-cool this cooler the day before your trip or the night before, or at least sometime before you're gonna be going out, because if you don't, you're just gonna be thawing and melting that ice they just put in there. You could also use the Yeti ice blocks, but imagine filling this thing 2/3 full of Yeti ice blocks. That's a lot of Yeti ice blocks. With the amount of money you're spending on those, you're getting into territories of getting other options as well. So the main reason I switched out of the Yeti cooler is because I was kind of done doing the whole pre-cool thing, emptying all the ice and then having to refill it again with ice and then digging through my food with ice. It was just getting to be too much, because we were going like every other week basically, or sometimes even every weekend. I knew there was other options, so that's when I started looking, and that's how I got to the Dometic cooler. So I ended up going with the CFX 25. So that's the smallest of the CFX series of electric coolers by them. And for me, for weekend trips, this is pretty much the size I would need to fill it up with enough food, a few drinks for the nights, and that's pretty much it. But it's not going to be a week-long cooler to hold a ton of food out there. Not to mention, to power this thing for a week, I mean, you're going to need some serious batteries. In my case, I can go 2 nights off of the battery that I bought with the Dometic fridge. If you go with the bigger battery, it's going to last even longer. But keep in mind, you can always go drive around, take a hike, do whatever, and charge up that battery to go an extra day easily out there camping. So you can make that thing last for a week trip easily if you're just willing to drive around a little bit and let that thing recharge. And for me, the biggest concern with going with an electric cooler was reliability. I don't really want to run into issues while I'm out there if my cooler stops working. With ice, you don't really have that. It's obviously the ice is going to melt, but you can just put more ice in. Fortunately, after using this thing for a couple of years, I have had 0 issues with it ever. I mean, there's never anything that has happened with it. It's performed just as expected. And in fact, probably even better. I didn't realize how long it would last off of the battery pack. So it's been a really good cooler overall. So now you're probably wondering, well, why would you switch to something like this then? Why would I be going with an Oyster now? I think something just bit me in the forehead. Anyways, if there's a weird bump, I think there's something in here flying around in the studio. Anyways, so you're probably wondering, okay, if I was so happy with the Dometic cooler, then why am I now using an Oyster? Well, this didn't exist when I got my Dometic cooler, but it did exist in the terms of like a prototype phase and stuff like that. They were still in the early stages of testing this to release it. In fact, the co-founder of the company reached out to me at that time about, I think it was a little over a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago. I don't remember exactly when it was, but they reached out to me and they were like, hey, do you want to test out this cooler? Give us some feedback on it. They talked about the company a little bit. And to be honest, at the time, that's when I just picked up my Dometic cooler and I felt like I have solved all the problems I need with coolers right now. Why would I go back to ice? It was just really bad timing for me to consider something like this. Even though I was looking at it, I was like, this looks too good. I was like, a new company putting something like this out, there's no way it's going to be perfect like the pictures looked. I was wrong. This is a really nice cooler, and the company and the people who have made it have paid attention to every detail on this thing to pretty much make a perfect cooler. Let me explain. So now we're gonna fast forward a bit. Back in April, Oyster reaches out again, and this time I say I'll give this thing a shot. And I'm really glad that I did, because I didn't realize I was gonna love this thing as much as I do. Now, there are definitely some things to consider if you're gonna go this route, because I don't think the Oyster is the best option for every type of camper out there, but I think it's a really good option for a lot of campers out there. So this cooler, using the 2 Oyster thermal batteries, essentially ice packs, will last you about an overnight camping trip in certain conditions. If you're taking this out in the hottest of weather, you may not experience, safe temperatures the next day. In fact, that's when I was taking it out in early summer, and I found, in days where it was getting to about 80 degrees and I had just the 2 ice packs in there, the next day I was kind of questioning, if my breakfast was still okay. And, to be honest, I didn't have the cooler super full by the next day. So all these things, there's a lot of factors that go into how long your ice is going to last in there, or how long your ice pack is going to last in there. And that's something to keep in mind. So depending on how long you're going out, you may be better served going with something else. But for me, right now, at least over the past year or so, we've been just going on overnight camping trips, and this is pretty much perfect. Now, I've also added a Yeti ice block to mine as well to make sure that I have extra peace of mind, with temperatures and stuff like that. I don't have thermometers running in this. I'm not checking it to make sure it's at the safe level and stuff like that. There's other channels who have done this and done tests at home. This is coming from the perspective from somebody who's taken this out on multiple camping trips in a variety of different weather conditions. That's how I've tested my cooler in real life testing. And I found that using the 2 Oyster thermal batteries paired with a 4-pound Yeti ice block tends to give me 2 days of proper cooling, because I can tell that my ice packs are still somewhat icy and the temperatures feel pretty cool inside of there. So I'd say for overnight trips, this is probably the best option you can go with if you're looking for a really simple option that doesn't require you to pre-cool like the Yeti, fill it with tons of ice. And keep in mind, if you go with a Yeti this size and you're filling it 2/3 of ice, you are going to have a lot less room. Even though that cooler is a lot bigger looking, it's actually smaller on the inside when you fill it properly with ice. So you'd have to go with a much bigger Yeti than I have, probably like a 45, to be somewhat similar to this one in the inside, even with that extra 4-pound ice block. So this thing holds plenty of food for us, for a family of 3, and sometimes we can get away with a 2-night trip, but like I said, I'm gonna make sure that I eat all of the perishable stuff on that second day, because in the third day, if we're going out, which we do go on 2-night trips, we'll usually just be doing like oatmeal or something like that for breakfast. I probably wouldn't feel safe, keeping this out there for 3 days. Obviously, it's not gonna hold a ton, given the size of it, but for overnight trips, for couples, for smaller families, I think this could be the best solution for most people out there who are looking to go away from having to deal with, bagged ice and pre-cooling and bulky heavy coolers. This is it. All right, so we now know how long this thing is gonna last while out there camping. And now I wanna shift to kind of the whole design of the Oyster cooler, because that was one of the things that honestly shocked me the most. When I first saw the pictures of it, I was kind of skeptical. I was like, this is a newer company. I'm kind of wondering how this whole final product is going to look. And it's honestly pretty amazing what they've come up with here and the quality that has gone into this thing. It's made in Norway, and from all the materials, all the edges of it, pretty much the entire thing, it looks absolutely amazing. I mean, this entire product is one of the most unique looking coolers out there. I mean, there's a reason that it's kind of taking the internet by storm. I mean, I see this cooler popping up all over the place in different campsites, also just different advertisements probably by them. They probably have a good Instagram budget. But other than that, I mean, this thing really does stand out. I mean, when you see it, you recognize this is an Oyster cooler. They've done a really good job with the design of it, and it's not over-designed or anything like that. This is a super minimalist looking cooler. And that's one of the things that I like about it. I love the simplicity of this whole thing, and it pretty much represents exactly what this thing is about. It's just about simplifying the entire cooler experience. So inside here, you'll see it says Delta at the top. That's their patented insulation, whatever they're doing inside. If you want to read more on that, you can go on the website. They kind of break it down on like a 2nd grade level, which I think is great. But essentially, it's aluminum on the outside, aluminum on the inside. They got this nice sealer on the top here. The lid on here latches from both sides. Now, something to keep in mind is if you open it up all the way and then you start wiggling around the lid, it can easily fall off. So just open it and you can prop it back. It's totally fine. But if you do wiggle it, it may come off. That's happened to me a couple times. The latch system works really well on here. and it feels really solid. So opening it and closing it, it doesn't feel, clunky or cheaply made. It has a nice solid latch feel to it, which I appreciate. If you opt for the bundle, which comes with the thermal batteries, it also comes with the aluminum handle here, which is my primary way that I've been using mine. So I've also tried out the strap, and I think it works well. It's surprisingly actually comfortable to wear it. But for me, I'm mostly just lifting it in and out of my trunk, so I find I like the aluminum handle a little bit better. But I will say that the red seatbelt style strap, it does look really cool with it. And honestly, if I was carrying it any further than I typically do, I would probably opt for the strap as well. So I like that the bundle comes with both options, and to change the handle out is super easy as well. You'll just turn counterclockwise, the little tempo sign right here. It's just a little latch, it unlocks, and then you'll just latch right back into place. Everything on here has been refined down to a very high level, from the quality to the way the whole thing works. I mean, it's been tested and it feels fantastic. It works really well. I don't have a lot of complaints with this cooler, and my one thing that I wish I did was I gave this thing a shot sooner, because I was under the impression that, I don't want to deal with ice anymore, and that's probably the case with a lot of people who are using a Yeti or similar style cooler. It's one of the biggest pains to have to deal with, to have to pre-cool and do all these things. There's no pre-cooling on this thing. This one, you just put the Oyster packs right in. It cools pretty much instantly, and that's just thanks to aluminum in general. It cools evenly. With the Yeti, with the plastic, if you just put your ice packs in there, they're pretty much just going to thaw, and by the time you get to your campsite, you have a kind of lukewarmish cool cooler, which isn't going to do anything for you. Now, as far as durability goes, I mean, the Yeti is definitely going to be the most durable out of all these. If I was to drop my Oyster cooler and I was to drop my Yeti cooler from, say, like a 4-foot height, like this counter that they're on right now, without a doubt, the Yeti is going to look a lot nicer. Now, after taking my Oyster out all summer, it still looks to be in pretty good condition. Now, I'm not super rough with my gear. I'm not throwing it in the trunk or taking it out and just dropping it on the ground. I'm generally pretty careful with my gear. I try not to damage it if I can, though I don't really baby it. It gets used, week after week. I'm not super rough with it, but if you were to drop this, just keep in mind, this is definitely going to show, wear over time. It could get some serious dents and dings. But the other cool thing about this cooler is you can pretty much take this one down to melting point. I learned this from the website, and pretty much recycle the entire thing. And you can take apart this entire thing too to change out parts. So if you were to really damage the lid to the point where it doesn't close anymore because you dropped it, you could definitely get a new lid, and there's different parts for that. They've thought all these things through already. But again, if you're just the slightest bit careful, I think you're gonna fare out just well with this cooler. You're not gonna have to worry about too many things other than, the minor scratches and dents that are just gonna happen over time. If you've ever seen those Rimowa suitcases, they're like $1,000 suitcases. My first job out of college was working at a Nordstrom, and we actually carried those. And I remember whenever the rep would come through, they'd always tell us, a dented and dinged up Rimowa bag, that's a well-traveled bag. Just remember to tell the customers that. I always thought that was hilarious because, whenever a customer would come through, the first thing they would ask if they want to buy one, can I get a pristine one in the back? This one has a little mark on it. At the end of the day, this type of gear, camping gear in general, is going to show wear over time. And I personally am okay with that. I don't mind the scratches and dings on it. And I think because it's a natural material like aluminum, it's going to age really well. I think it looks a lot better than, plastic that's scratched up and dinged up. Aluminum, it does add a little bit of character to it, I will say. It does look nice, and I think it will look nice over time too as it ages. But yeah, only time will tell in this case, and I'm definitely going to be using this one on pretty much most of our overnight camping trips, so we'll revisit. We'll revisit this topic in 3 years. We'll see how the Oyster is held up, and I'm really glad that Oyster has sent me one. Now, I didn't promise to make a video. I never said I would say anything good about it. I never partnered with Oyster or did anything like that. So all these opinions on this cooler are my own. So I don't want you to have the understanding that, this is just some type of partnership I formed with them. No, I honestly wasn't ever even planning on working with them, even when the co-founder reached out to me. So this is just me using this thing and realizing that for myself and my family and the style of camping we do, this is probably the best cooler for most of our camping trips, and it's why I'm going to be using it, for years to come. So yeah, that's pretty much going to wrap it up for my thoughts on the Oyster so far. If you have any questions, be sure to drop a comment down below. We can always chat more. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and we'll catch you in the next video. Take care.